My sister destroyed my Christmas iPhone because hers cost less, so my parents sold all her gifts and gave me the money. Ara calculated the exact price difference between our gifts before she threw my new iPhone at the wall. Your phone? $1,200. My gifts? $1,000. You owe me $200. When my parents said no, she grabbed my phone and launched it like a missile. Glass everywhere. Screen destroyed. My Christmas present in pieces because her Gucci bag wasn't expensive enough. Ara's been entitled since birth, but at 14, it's weaponized. Last month, she told her school we don't feed her. CPS showed up at our door. Found a fully stocked kitchen and Ara's room full of designer clothes. Christmas morning started normally. I got the iPhone I'd asked for. My old one was dying. Ara told our parents to surprise her, then got furious when the surprise didn't exceed my phone's value. She actually pulled out her phone's calculator, adding up her Versace perfume, Gucci bag, designer shoes, makeup palette. After she destroyed my phone, my dad, a former Navy SEAL who never raises his voice, absolutely exploded. Ara locked herself in her room, sobbing. She left for her friend Ashley's house without apologizing. Yesterday, my parents handed me $1,500 cash. We sold Ara's Christmas presents. All of them. Phone repair costs less than this. Keep the extra. They'd returned everything to stores, sold the Gucci on Poshmark, gave me every penny. Ara came home this morning, saw me using my repaired phone, and lost it. You stole my Christmas. You destroyed mine first. That was about principle. You always get more. She lunged for my phone again. Dad stepped between us. Touch his property again and you're going to military school. Applications are already filled out. Ara went pale. You wouldn't. Try me. One more tantrum, one more destroyed item, one more false report, and you're gone. She's been in her room since, posting about her abusive family on Instagram. Her friends started a GoFundMe to help Ara escape her toxic household. It has $12. I used the extra money for AirPods. When Ara saw them, she calculated their price and demanded the difference back. Dad told her the only thing she's getting is therapy, starting next week. Therapy is for crazy people. No, therapy is for people who throw tantrums over math they did on Christmas presents. So yeah, maybe it is for crazy people. She's currently Googling whether she can sue me for sibling theft, which isn't even a real thing. My cousin's TikTok about it went viral, calling Ara Calculator Girl. She's trying to get it removed for defamation. The repair shop guy asked what happened. When I told him, he gave me a discount and said, "Damn," and I thought my sister was bad. But this morning, everything changed. Ara came downstairs carrying a manila folder, completely calm, different from her usual rage. "I've been documenting everything," she said. "Documenting what?" She opened the folder. Screenshots, photos, videos I didn't know existed. 2 years of favoritism, every gift receipt, every birthday, every event where you got more. Ara, this is insane. Is it? She pulled out a photo. My 13th birthday party at a restaurant. Her 11th, a cake at home. Yours cost $800. Mine cost $40. You asked for a home party. Here's Christmas 2019. Your gaming setup, $2,000. My gifts, $800. I saved birthday money for half of that. She kept going. Spreadsheets. Actual spreadsheets with columns for gifts, cost, and differential. 3 years of data. According to this, our parents have spent $14,000 more on you. My parents walked in, saw the folder. Ara, where did you get those receipts? Mom asked. Your email, your Amazon account, credit card statements. You went through our private, and I sent it all to Grandma, Grandpa, Aunt Linda, everyone. Dad's phone started buzzing. Mom's too. Ara smiled. Not her usual bratty smirk. Something scarier. Grandma's already called her lawyer, says this is financial abuse, preferential treatment severe enough for intervention. Ara, you're being ridiculous. Am I? Check your phones. A text from Grandma. This is disgusting. How could you do this to Ara? We're coming over. Another from Aunt Linda. I always suspected you favored him. This proves it. Ara pulled out one more paper. Oh, and this? This is from 3 years ago. Dad's text to Mom about how you wished Ara had never been born. How you only wanted one child. I'd never seen that text. My parents' faces went white. You said what? I asked. It was after she destroyed my leather jacket, Dad said quietly. I was angry. So everything makes sense now, Ara said. The favoritism, the military school threats. You never wanted me. Her phone buzzed. Grandma's here, with her lawyer. The doorbell rang. Ara smiled wider. Calculator Girl is about to get everything she's owed. Dad opened the door, and Grandma walked in first, her face tight and angry, in a way I'd never seen before. Grandpa followed behind her, looking uncomfortable, and then came this guy in a suit, carrying a leather briefcase that screamed, "Expensive lawyer." The man stuck out his hand to my dad. "Hank Bailey, family law attorney. Your mother-in-law asked me to review some concerning documentation regarding your children." My dad's face went pale, and my mom grabbed the back of the couch like she needed support. Era stood there with her folder clutched to her chest, and I could see her hands shaking, even though she was trying to look confident. Hank looked around at all of us and said we should sit down to discuss what he called the documented pattern of discriminatory treatment Ara had provided to her grandmother. My stomach dropped, because this was real. This wasn't just Ara being dramatic. There was an actual lawyer in our house talking about discrimination. We all moved to the living room like zombies, and I sat in the chair farthest from everyone because I didn't know where I was supposed to be in all this. Grandma sat on the couch and pulled Ara down next to her, keeping one arm around Ara's shoulders. Grandpa took the other end of the couch, and Hank sat in Dad's usual chair, which felt wrong somehow. My parents stood near the doorway like they were thinking about running. Hank opened his briefcase with a click that sounded too loud in the quiet room. He pulled out printed copies of Ara's spreadsheets, and I could see yellow highlighter and pink sticky notes covering the pages. There were so many papers, way more than I thought Ara had shown us earlier. My dad started to say something, but Hank held up his hand in this calm way that somehow shut Dad up completely. "I need to present our findings first. Then you'll have a chance to respond." Our findings, like Ara and Grandma, were a team now. Hank spread the papers on the coffee table in this organized way, turning some so my parents could see them better. I recognized Ara's handwriting on the sticky notes, little comments like restaurant party and no party, and why the difference. My mom's face was getting redder by the second, and Dad's jaw was so tight I could see the muscle jumping. Hank started going through everything in this calm voice that made it sound even worse somehow. December 2020, the narrator's 13th birthday party at a restaurant, total cost $800. Ara's 11th birthday party 2 months later, homemade cake, estimated cost $40. Christmas 2019, gaming setup for the narrator, parental contribution approximately $1,500 after his savings are accounted for. Ara's Christmas gifts that year totaled $800. He kept going, pulling out photos Ara had taken, receipts she'd printed from my parents' email. Then he got to something I didn't even know about. Summer 2021, 3-week basketball camp for the narrator, cost $3,000. Ara spent 1 week at her grandmother's house, no camp, no activities. I felt my stomach twist because I remembered that camp. It was amazing, but I never thought about what Ara was doing while I was gone. Mom's face was bright red now, and she looked like she might cry or scream or both. I watched my mom's hands clench and unclench at her sides. I looked over at Ara, and she was sitting there next to Grandma looking weird, like she was happy her evidence was being taken seriously, but also kind of scared, like maybe she didn't expect it to actually get this far. Her folder was on her lap, and she kept touching it like she needed to make sure it was still there. When Hank got to the part about Dad's text message, the one about wishing Ara had never been born, Ara's eyes got all shiny with tears. Grandma pulled her closer, and Ara leaned into her grandmother's side. I'd never seen Ara look vulnerable like that. Usually she was all rage and calculation. Grandma was staring at my dad with this look of total disappointment, and Dad couldn't even meet her eyes. Grandpa was shaking his head slowly like he couldn't believe what he was hearing. Dad finally exploded. "She hacked into our private accounts. She went through our emails, our credit card statements, our Amazon orders without permission. This is a violation of our privacy, and she manipulated the data without any context." His voice was loud, that Navy SEAL command voice that usually made Ara back down. But Hank didn't even flinch. He just looked at my dad with this calm expression and said, "The method of discovery doesn't change whether the underlying facts are true. Can you explain the spending differences if there's legitimate context? Because from where I'm sitting, the numbers tell a clear story." Dad opened his mouth and closed it again. Mom stepped forward like she was going to defend them. Mom jumped in trying to explain. The gaming setup was partly his birthday money he'd been saving for months, and Ara asked for a home party. She specifically said she wanted to celebrate with just family, but Hank was ready for that. He pulled out more papers, receipts with amounts highlighted. "According to these records, your son contributed $200 of his own money. You paid $1,500. That's still a significant parental investment compared to Ara's $800 Christmas." He had another paper. "And regarding the birthday party, I have text messages here where Ara asked if she could have friends over and was told no because you'd rather keep it small." Mom's explanation died in her throat. The numbers were right there, highlighted and sticky noted and impossible to argue with. My face burned hot, because everyone was seeing exactly how much more I got, and there was no way to spin it anymore. The doorbell rang again, and Dad went to answer it, probably grateful for the excuse to leave the room. Aunt Linda came in talking before she even got her coat off. I got Ara's email, and I have to say, I'm not surprised at all. I've been watching this favoritism for years. She walked into the living room and went straight to Ara, bending down to hug her. Sweetie, I'm so glad you finally spoke up. Then she turned to my parents. Last Thanksgiving, remember? You paid for him to bring his friend Jake on the cabin trip, but told Ara there wasn't room for Ashley. The cabin has 4 bedrooms. Mom tried to interrupt, but Linda kept going. And at Christmas gatherings, he always gets the bigger gifts, the more expensive presents. Everyone's noticed. We just didn't want to say anything. Linda sat on the arm of the couch next to Ara, like she was taking sides physically. Grandpa had been quiet this whole time, just listening and watching. Now he looked straight at me. How do you feel about these spending differences now that you see the actual numbers? His voice wasn't angry, just serious and kind of sad. I opened my mouth but didn't know what to say. Everyone was looking at me waiting. I didn't realize it was that different. I just thought, I trailed off because, what could I say? That I never noticed because I was the one getting more. Grandpa nodded slowly. That's part of the problem, son. You never had to notice because you were the one benefiting from it. His words hit me hard because he was right. I'd been walking around thinking Ara was just spoiled and dramatic, never questioning why I got more. Hank pulled out another paper. I think we need a neutral third party to mediate this situation. I'd like to recommend a family therapist named Barbara Bailey. She specializes in sibling equity issues and parent-child relationships. My parents looked exhausted, like they'd been fighting for hours instead of just sitting through this presentation. Mom glanced at Dad, and Dad looked at Grandma, who was still staring them down with that disappointed expression. Fine, Dad said quietly. We'll make an appointment. Hank wrote something down. I'll have my office send you her contact information. I strongly suggest you schedule something within the next week. Ara's phone kept buzzing in her pocket, over and over. Grandma noticed and held out her hand. Give me your phone, Ara. Ara hesitated but handed it over. Grandma unlocked it, and her face changed from sympathetic to angry in about 2 seconds. You've been texting your friends this entire time? And posting on Instagram? She scrolled through Ara's phone. Justice finally coming, family meeting with lawyer, truth coming out. Grandma looked at Ara with this disappointed expression. This isn't entertainment, Ara. This isn't content for your friends. This is serious family business, and you're treating it like a show. Ara's face crumbled, and she started crying for real. Not the angry tantrum crying, but actual hurt tears. Even Grandma, who'd been totally on her side, was calling out her behavior. I watched Ara's shoulders shake and felt this weird mix of satisfaction that someone was finally pointing out her manipulation and guilt because she was genuinely crying now. Grandma handed Ara's phone back and stood up, smoothing her skirt. Hank closed his briefcase with a snap that sounded loud in the quiet room. Grandpa walked over to my parents and put a hand on Dad's shoulder, his expression tired and sad. Grandma looked at Ara one more time, her face softer now. She bent down and kissed Ara's forehead, then straightened and turned to my parents. She told them to get help, real professional help, not just yelling and threats. Hank said he'd send Barbara Bailey's contact information and that he expected to hear they'd scheduled something within the week. Aunt Linda hugged Ara goodbye and shot my parents a look that said she'd be watching how they handled this. The 3 of them left, and the front door closing behind them felt like the end of something, but also the start of something worse. My parents stood in the living room for a minute, not looking at each other or at us. Dad rubbed his face with both hands, and Mom stared at the floor. Ara sat on the couch, still crying, quieter now, her shoulders shaking less. Finally, Dad said we needed to talk, separately, and told me to come to his office while Mom stayed with Ara. I followed him down the hall, my stomach tight, not sure what was coming. Dad sat behind his desk, and I took the chair across from him, the same chair where I'd gotten lectured about bad grades or staying out too late. He looked older than I remembered, lines around his eyes I hadn't noticed before. He started talking, slow and careful, like he was picking each word. He said they'd never tracked spending the way Ara had, never sat down and added up who got what. He admitted they probably did favor me, not on purpose, but because I was easier, because I didn't throw fits or demand things or make everything complicated. He said when I asked for something reasonable, they said yes, and when Ara asked for something, it usually came with drama and tears and accusations, so they started saying no automatically. His voice got quieter as he talked, like he was realizing things as he said them out loud. I sat there listening and felt this weird pressure building in my chest. When he stopped talking, I heard myself say that maybe Ara threw those fits because she felt ignored, because she saw me getting stuff and her getting less, and didn't know how else to make them pay attention. Mom's face when I said that, I'll never forget it. She looked like I'd hit her. She came into the office right then, must have been listening in the hallway, and her face was red, and her voice got loud and defensive. She said Ara had been difficult since she was a toddler, always demanding attention, always making everything about her, always needing more than anyone else could give. But her voice cracked on the last part, like she was trying to convince herself more than me. She kept talking, listing all the ways Ara had been hard to deal with over the years, but I could hear something breaking underneath the words. Dad told her to stop, that this wasn't helping, and she left the room. I heard her footsteps going toward Ara's room, heard the door open and close. Dad told me to go to my room, that they needed to talk to Ara now, and I left. In my room, I could hear them through the walls. Our house wasn't built for privacy. Ara's voice came through first, screaming, the words kind of muffled but clear enough. She kept yelling about the text message, about how it proved they never wanted her, how everything made sense now. Dad's voice was lower, harder to hear, trying to explain about being angry after she destroyed his jacket. Ara wouldn't listen, just kept repeating the same thing over and over. You wished I was never born. You wished I was never born. Like a song she couldn't stop singing. Mom was crying. I could hear that too, and Dad's voice got louder, not yelling but firm, trying to make Ara understand. It went on for maybe 20 minutes, the same argument in circles, until Ara screamed at them to get out, and I heard her door slam. My parents' footsteps went past my room toward their bedroom, and their door closed too. The house got quiet, except for the sound of someone crying in Ara's room. Softer now, exhausted. I lay on my bed and pulled out my new AirPods, still in their box, white and perfect and expensive. They felt heavy in my hands, heavier than they should. Ara's spreadsheets were manipulative. Going through private accounts was wrong, but she wasn't wrong about the numbers. I'd gotten more, a lot more, and I never questioned it because it worked in my favor. I put the AirPods on my nightstand and stared at the ceiling, feeling sick. The next morning, I woke up to my phone buzzing with texts from Mom telling me to come downstairs. I found my parents in the kitchen, Dad on his phone, Mom looking worried. Dad was talking to someone, his voice careful and polite, saying he understood and thanked them for letting them know. He hung up and looked at Mom and said that was Nolan Bailey, Ashley's dad. Ara couldn't stay at their house anymore because she'd been talking badly about our family constantly, and Ashley was getting uncomfortable with it. Mom asked if Ara knew, and Dad shook his head, but right then I heard footsteps on the stairs. Fast, and Ara appeared in the kitchen doorway. Her face was red, and her eyes were wet, and she looked at Dad and said she'd heard everything, her voice breaking. She turned and ran back upstairs, and her door slammed hard enough to shake the walls. I stood there watching my parents, both of them looking helpless, and for the first time I felt genuinely bad for Ara instead of just annoyed at her drama. She'd tried to get support from family and friends, and it was all falling apart. Even the people who'd been on her side were backing away. I went upstairs and stood outside Ara's door, hearing her crying inside. I knocked, which I never did. We had an unspoken rule about staying out of each other's space. She yelled at me to go away, her voice thick and angry. I opened the door anyway and went in, and she was on her bed with her face in her pillow, her whole body shaking. I sat down on her floor, cross-legged, and didn't say anything. The silence stretched out, awkward and heavy, and I could hear her breathing slow down a little. Finally, I said the spreadsheets were right. I did get more, and I was sorry I never noticed. My voice sounded weird saying it, like someone else was talking. Ara lifted her head and looked at me, her face all blotchy and her eyes suspicious like I was setting up some trick or joke. But then her face crumpled, and she started crying again. Different from before. Not the angry tantrum crying, but something that looked like it hurt. She said it wasn't even about the money. Not really. It was about feeling like she didn't matter as much as me. She said it felt like she was the kid they got stuck with after having the one they actually wanted, and her voice broke on the last word. I didn't know what to say to that. No words felt big enough or right enough, so I just sat there on her floor. After a while, Ara grabbed her phone off her nightstand and scrolled through it, then turned it toward me. Her Instagram stories were still up, the ones about our toxic family, and the comments underneath were brutal. Her friends were calling her dramatic, saying she was overreacting. One girl wrote, "Maybe your parents are just tired of your attitude." Ara's face, while I read them, looked small and hurt and young. She said she thought people would understand, but instead, they thought she was the problem, and her voice was so quiet, I almost didn't hear her. 3 days later, we had our first family therapy session with Barbara Bailey. The office was in a strip mall between a nail salon and a pizza place. Nothing fancy, just a door with a small sign. Inside was a waiting room with uncomfortable chairs and old magazines, and then Barbara came out to get us. She was younger than I expected, maybe 40, with glasses and a calm voice that made you want to tell her things. Her office had a couch and some chairs arranged in a circle, and she had us all sit down, no one next to anyone else, maximum space between us. Barbara started by having each of us describe the current situation from our perspective, and it was incredibly awkward listening to everyone talk. Dad went first, talking about the phone incident and Ara's documentation and the family meeting with Grandma. Mom went next, her voice shaky, talking about feeling attacked and misunderstood. I went third and tried to be fair, mentioning both the favoritism and Ara's methods. Then Ara talked, and listening to her describe feeling unwanted since childhood, listing specific memories going back years, made me realize how long this had been building. She talked about being 5 and asking why I got a bigger birthday party, being 7 and noticing I got new clothes more often, being 10 and seeing I got to do activities she wasn't allowed to try. Her voice stayed steady, but her hands were shaking, and she kept looking at the floor. Barbara listened to everything without interrupting, just nodding and taking notes. When Ara finished, Barbara asked my parents about the text message, the one about wishing Ara had never been born. Dad's face went pale, and he admitted he'd sent it in anger after Ara destroyed his leather jacket, but said he'd never actually wished Ara didn't exist. Ara interrupted before he could finish, her voice sharp and hurt, saying, "But you thought it. You wrote it down, so some part of you means it." Dad looked completely broken. His shoulders slumped, and he opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Mom started crying before Barbara could say anything else, her hands covering her face while her shoulders shook. She pulled her hands down and looked at Ara with red eyes and said she knows Ara's been harder to parent than me, that Ara's been tiring since she was little with the tantrums and demands and constant need for attention. Her voice cracked when she added, "That doesn't mean they love Ara less. It just means parenting her takes more energy, and sometimes they're just so worn out, they don't have anything left." Ara's face went hard and cold, her arms crossed tight over her chest. Barbara leaned forward and asked Mom to consider whether calling Ara tiring and hard might have made Ara feel like a problem instead of a person. She pointed out that if Ara picked up on their frustration, she might have acted out more because she felt like she was already seen as difficult anyway. Mom's face went pale, and she looked at Dad, who was staring at the floor. Barbara said sometimes parents create patterns without meaning to, where they expect certain behavior from a child, and then that child lives up to those expectations because that's the role they've been given in the family. Barbara pulled out a notebook and started writing, then tore out 2 pages and handed them to my parents and Ara. She explained the homework for the next month, her voice calm and clear, like she was giving instructions that weren't up for debate. My parents had to track every single dollar they spent on both of us, from the school supplies to gas money to new clothes, everything logged in a shared document. Ara had to write down 3 positive things each parent did every day, even small stuff like making breakfast or asking about her day. Ara rolled her eyes so hard I thought they might get stuck, but she took the paper and folded it into her pocket. I watched her face and could tell she was scared this wouldn't actually change anything, that my parents would do the homework for a week and then forget about it or find ways to justify the differences. Barbara told us all to come back in 2 weeks with our completed homework, and the session ended with everyone feeling raw and uncomfortable. At the school the next day, I heard Calculator Girl whispered in the hallway before I even got to my locker. Some guy I barely knew made a calculator motion with his hands when Ara walked past, and his friends laughed. Ara kept her head down and walked faster, her backpack bouncing against her shoulders. By lunch, the whole situation had spread somehow, probably through Ashley or one of Ara's other former friends posting about it. I saw Ara sitting alone at a table in the corner of the cafeteria, picking at her food without eating it. Half the kids were making fun of her for being dramatic and entitled, calling her spoiled and saying she deserved whatever she got. The other half were posting things about how brave she was for standing up to family favoritism, treating her like some kind of hero for exposing our parents. I grabbed my lunch tray and walked over to Ara's table, sitting down across from her even though it felt incredibly weird. She looked up at me with surprise and suspicion, like she thought I was there to make fun of her too. We didn't talk much, just sat there eating in awkward silence while people stared at us. Ashley walked past with her new friend group and didn't even look at Ara, and I saw Ara's eyes get shiny before she looked back down at her tray. 2 days later, Mom's phone rang during dinner, and she answered it. Then her face went tight and worried. She stepped into the other room and came back 10 minutes later saying Ara's school counselor wanted to meet with them tomorrow. Lucy had called because Ara's grades dropped from mostly B's to D's and F's in just a few weeks, and her teachers said she seemed checked out and depressed in class. The next afternoon, my parents came home from the meeting looking shaken, and Dad pulled me aside to tell me what Lucy had shared. Ara gave Lucy permission to tell them she'd been talking about feeling worthless and unwanted at home, like she was the family mistake they were stuck with. She told Lucy she didn't see the point in trying at the school when nothing she did mattered anyway, because her parents would always love me more. Mom called Barbara immediately and scheduled 2 extra therapy sessions for that week, her voice shaking while she explained the situation. I found Ara in her room that night going through old photo albums spread across her floor, and when I got closer, I saw she'd put sticky notes on every picture. Pink sticky notes marked photos where I was in the center or featured bigger, and blue sticky notes marked ones where she was in the background or cut off at the edge. There were way more pink notes than blue ones, especially in the albums from when I was younger. She had photos from my elementary school concerts where I was front and center, and photos from her concerts where she was barely visible in the back row. Birthday party photos where I had huge celebrations with decorations and friends, and her birthdays with just family around a kitchen table. Ara looked up at me with this expression that was part angry and part broken, and she pointed at the albums and said, "See, even the pictures prove it." Her voice was quiet and defeated instead of her usual sharp anger, and I didn't know what to say because she was right, and the evidence was covering her entire floor. Our second therapy session happened the following week, and Barbara asked my parents to bring their spending tracking sheet. Mom pulled out a printed spreadsheet that showed every purchase for both of us over the past 3 weeks, and the results made everyone uncomfortable. Even trying to be fair and conscious of it, they'd still spent more on me. The difference was smaller, but it was there. I needed new basketball shoes because my old ones had holes, which cost $80. They gave me gas money twice for driving to practice, $40 total. I got lunch money 3 times because I have late classes and can't eat during regular lunch period, another $30. Ara got new art supplies for $60 and money for a school field trip for $25. Barbara studied the numbers and pointed out that age differences create natural spending gaps because older kids have more activities and transportation needs and different schedules. She said the pattern should balance over time, though, maybe over 6 months instead of trying to make it exactly equal every single month. Ara spoke up then, her voice stronger than it had been in days. She admitted she went through my parents' accounts because she needed proof she wasn't crazy, that the feeling of being less important was real and not just something she was making up in her head. She said for years she thought maybe she was just being dramatic like everyone always told her. Maybe she was the problem, and she was imagining the favoritism. But the numbers proved it was real, that her gut feeling about being treated differently had actual evidence behind it. Barbara nodded and told Ara that her feelings were completely real and valid, that recognizing unfair treatment doesn't make someone dramatic or wrong. But then Barbara's voice got firmer, and she said going through private accounts and violating privacy wasn't an okay way to address those feelings, that there were better methods like asking for family meetings or requesting therapy earlier. My parents agreed right there in Barbara's office to create a shared family calendar where all spending on both kids would be logged where everyone could see it. Barbara suggested they aim for balance over 6 months instead of stressing about exact equality each month, since some months one kid might need more for legitimate reasons like school trips or equipment. Ara looked doubtful, her arms crossed and her face guarded. She nodded slowly, but I could tell from her expression she was waiting to see if they'd actually follow through, or if this was just more empty promises that would fade after a few weeks. That evening, Aunt Linda called and asked to talk to my parents, and they put her on speaker in the kitchen. Linda's voice came through sounding embarrassed and apologetic, saying Grandma had called her and told her the whole story, including Ara's privacy violations and the missing context around some of the spending differences. Linda admitted she jumped to conclusions based on Ara's initial presentation of the evidence, and she said she still thought the favoritism was real, but she understood now the situation was way more complicated than Ara made it seem. She apologized for the harsh texts and for taking sides so quickly without hearing everyone's perspective. My parents thanked her and said they appreciated her calling, and after they hung up, Mom looked relieved that at least one family member wasn't completely against them anymore. The next day at the school, Ara's Instagram account got reported by someone and temporarily suspended for cyberbullying our family. Ara found out during lunch and completely lost it, her hands shaking while she stared at her phone screen showing the suspension notice. She was devastated because social media was basically her only social outlet now that Ashley stopped talking to her and her other friends were keeping their distance. She came home and immediately accused me of reporting her account, her voice rising into a yell. I told her I didn't do it and had no reason to, that I didn't even know you could report accounts for family stuff. She didn't believe me at first, her eyes red from crying and her whole body tense with anger. I pulled out my phone and showed her my Instagram to prove I hadn't reported anything, and eventually she calmed down enough to stop yelling, but she still looked broken and lost without her main connection to the outside world. Next hour, Ara had her first individual therapy session scheduled, and my parents drove her there because she refused to go alone. She came back different somehow, her shoulders less tight, and her face not showing that constant anger she usually carried. She walked in and went straight to her room without the usual door slam, and when Mom knocked to ask how it went, Ara actually opened the door and said it helped to talk to someone who understood her feelings without judging them. Over dinner that night, Ara seemed lighter, like some weight had lifted off her chest, though she still got annoyed when Dad asked her to clear her plate and snapped at me when I accidentally bumped her chair. The therapy didn't fix everything overnight, but I could see small changes in how she moved through the house, less like she was preparing for battle every second. 2 days later, Grandma called and asked to speak with each of us separately, starting with me while Ara and my parents waited in other rooms. Grandma told me she saw how I sat with Ara at lunch when Ashley wasn't talking to her, and she said that took real courage to stand up for my sister, even after everything she'd done. She said she was proud of me for seeing past the anger to the hurt underneath, and her voice got soft when she told me that family means showing up even when it's hard. Then she talked to Ara, and I heard Ara crying through the wall, and later Ara told me Grandma said she was proud of her for doing the therapy work, even though facing her feelings was scary and painful. Grandma told Ara that getting help showed strength, not weakness, and Ara needed to hear that from someone besides our parents, who she still didn't fully trust. The next week, I noticed my parents making different choices about how they treated Ara compared to before all this started. Mom pulled out her phone during dinner and took pictures of Ara talking about her art class, actually focusing the camera on her, instead of just getting her in the background of shots centered on me. Dad asked Ara what she thought about spring break plans, instead of just announcing we were going to visit his Navy buddy like he usually did, and Ara's eyes went wide like she couldn't believe he actually wanted her opinion. Ara suggested a beach trip, and I expected Dad to dismiss it immediately because he hates sitting on sand, but instead, he pulled out his laptop and started looking at beach house rentals while asking Ara which beach she preferred. Ara kept glancing at me like she thought this was some kind of trick, but Mom joined in discussing which week would work best and what activities Ara wanted to do there. At the school, the calculator girl nickname started fading as other drama took over the gossip cycle, some fight between two girls in the junior class becoming the new hot topic. Ara's friend group expanded beyond just Ashley, and I saw her eating lunch with 3 other girls who were in her art class. She looked more confident walking through the hallways, her head up instead of hunched over her phone, like having her feelings validated in therapy gave her permission to take up actual space. Ashley came back around too and apologized for ghosting Ara, and they started hanging out again, but Ara didn't drop her new friends to only focus on Ashley like she would have before. Our 5th therapy session with Barbara happened on a Thursday afternoon, and Barbara asked each of us what success looked like for our family going forward. Ara spoke first and said she wanted to feel like she mattered as much as I did, that she wanted to stop constantly comparing and calculating, but she needed to know the playing field was actually level. I said I wanted to stop feeling guilty for existing, that I didn't ask to be favored, but I also couldn't fix the past, and I needed to not carry that weight forever. Barbara nodded and pointed out we both needed the same basic thing, to feel valued without it coming at the other person's expense, and she said that was actually possible if we all committed to the work. That weekend, my parents called another family meeting and announced a new rule about alternating which kid got priority for activities each week. Week 1, Ara's schedule and preferences came first. Week 2, mine did, and neither of us would always be the one accommodated or always be the one compromising. It felt awkward at first because we'd never operated that way, and the first priority week Ara picked a movie I hated, but I had to watch it anyway. But then my priority week came, and Ara had to come to my basketball game instead of staying home, and I realized she'd been doing that kind of compromise for years, while I never had to. Ara stopped pulling out her calculator app to track who got what, because the alternating system meant she didn't have to keep score anymore. 3 weeks into the new system, Ara came to my room after dinner and stood in my doorway looking nervous. She said she wanted to apologize for destroying my phone and admitted she was trying to hurt me the way she felt hurt by the favoritism. Her voice shook when she said she knew it was wrong and she was sorry for taking her anger out on my property. I accepted her apology and told her I'd been pretty blind to her feelings for years, that I should have noticed the differences in how our parents treated us, and I was sorry for being so oblivious, even if I didn't mean it badly. We stood there awkwardly for a minute. Then Ara left, but something shifted between us after that conversation. The following Saturday, my parents called us to the living room for a family meeting without Barbara there to guide it. Dad pulled out a printed document and presented a plan for the next 6 months, covering equal spending budgets for both kids, the alternating priority weeks, and monthly family check-ins to address issues before they became explosions. Mom added that they'd track all spending in a shared calendar we could all access, so Ara wouldn't have to hack into accounts to see the numbers. Ara looked cautious, like she was waiting for the catch, but she nodded slowly and agreed to try their plan for 6 months to see if they actually followed through. Later that evening, Dad asked Ara to come to his office privately, and I heard their voices through the wall, but couldn't make out words. Ara came out an hour later with red eyes, but she was smiling, and the next day she told me Dad showed her photos of when she was a baby and talked about how excited they were when she was born. He told her stories about her first words and first steps, about how much they loved her, and Ara said she'd needed to hear that for years, but was scared to ask. Dad admitted to her that he'd been so focused on managing her difficult behavior that he forgot to tell her she was wanted and loved underneath all the discipline. The next morning, Mom took Ara shopping and told her to pick out whatever she actually wanted instead of what Mom thought would be appropriate. Ara came home carrying bags from the art store with her face glowing, showing me new paintbrushes and a leather sketchbook and charcoal pencils she'd been wanting forever. Mom had let her spend 2 hours in the store trying different supplies and asking the staff questions, and Ara couldn't stop talking about the watercolor set she picked out. For the first time in months, Ara looked genuinely happy instead of angry or calculating, and I realized how rare it was to see her face without that tight expression of resentment. During my next session with Barbara, I admitted something I'd never said out loud before. I told her I never questioned the favoritism, because part of me was scared that if I acknowledged it, my parents might start loving me less to make things equal with Ara. Barbara leaned forward and explained that love isn't a limited resource like money, that Ara getting more attention doesn't mean I get less love from our parents. She said my fear was normal but wrong, that healthy families can love multiple children fully without diminishing anyone. The relief I felt hearing that was huge, like I'd been holding my breath for years without realizing it. Ara's mood kept improving over the next few weeks. Her grades went from barely passing to solid B's and 1A in art class. Her art teacher pulled her aside after class one day and told her she was submitting one of Ara's paintings to a regional competition for high school students. Ara came home buzzing with excitement, but also terrified to tell our parents about it. She stood in the kitchen for 10 minutes trying to find the words, like she didn't trust they would actually care about her achievement. When she finally told them, Mom screamed and hugged her, and Dad immediately asked which piece got submitted so he could see it. Ara showed them a photo on her phone of this incredible sunset painting she'd done, all oranges and purples blending together. Dad drove to a frame shop that same evening and came back with an expensive custom frame. They hung Ara's competition piece in the living room where everyone could see it, and Ara stood staring at it on the wall with tears running down her face. Our 6th therapy session focused on the future instead of the past. Barbara told us we'd made significant progress, but the real challenge was maintaining these changes long-term, not just riding the wave of motivation from the crisis. She recommended monthly check-ins for the next 6 months to make sure we didn't slip back into old patterns, then quarterly sessions after that if things stayed stable. My parents agreed immediately, and Ara nodded, looking relieved that Barbara wasn't abandoning us just because things were better. 3 months after we started the spending tracker, my parents called us to the living room to review the results. Dad pulled up the spreadsheet on his laptop and walked us through the numbers. I got more for basketball expenses like shoes and tournament fees, but Ara got more for art supplies and her photography class. The total difference was less than $50 over 3 months. Ara stared at the screen for a long time, then admitted she felt much better seeing the actual numbers prove they were really trying. She said knowing the spending was tracked and visible made her feel like she mattered as much as me, that she wasn't being forgotten or ignored anymore. Ashley showed up at our door one Saturday, asking to talk to Ara. Ara looked nervous, but let her in, and they disappeared into Ara's room for over an hour. When Ashley left, Ara told me they'd fully repaired their friendship. Ashley apologized for her dad overreacting and cutting off contact, said she missed Ara and wanted to hang out again like before. The next week, Ara asked if Ashley could come to one of our family therapy sessions as a support person. Barbara agreed and spent part of the session helping Ara explain to Ashley what she'd learned about expressing feelings appropriately instead of exploding or manipulating. Ashley listened carefully and told Ara she was proud of her for doing the work to get better. Ara cried happy tears and hugged Ashley, and I could see how much having her best friend back meant to her. The acceptance letter from the summer basketball camp arrived in April. The program cost $2,000 for 2 weeks of intensive training with college coaches. Instead of just paying for it like they would have before, my parents called Ara and me to the kitchen table to discuss the budget. Dad explained the camp cost and asked if I really wanted to go, then turned to Ara and offered her an equivalent amount for a summer art program if she could find one she wanted to attend. Ara's whole face lit up like someone had turned on a switch inside her. She pulled out her phone right there and started searching for art programs, finding a 2-week intensive workshop at a local college that cost $1,900. Mom said they'd pay for both programs, and Ara actually bounced in her chair with excitement at being included in the financial planning instead of just finding out later what she got. Ara spent an entire evening going through her Instagram and deleting all the posts about our family drama. She removed the stories about abuse and toxic household, took down the screenshots of arguments, erased everything related to Calculator Girl. Then she posted a photo of her competition painting with a caption about entering a regional art competition and thanking her art teacher for believing in her. Her friends flooded the comments with support and encouragement. Ara told me later that night that it felt way better to be known for her art than for family drama, that she was tired of being the girl who complained about her parents online. Family dinner a few nights later felt different from any meal we'd had in years. We sat around the table eating Mom's lasagna and actually talking and laughing together. Dad made a joke about Ara's spreadsheet skills and how she should become an accountant when she grows up. Ara laughed instead of getting defensive or angry, and Mom added that maybe they should hire Ara as the family accountant to keep tracking spending. Ara grinned and said her rates were very reasonable. I made a joke about her calculator app getting a workout, and Ara threw a napkin at me, but she was smiling. The whole dinner felt light and easy, like we were a normal family, instead of people walking on eggshells around each other. The formal apology happened on a Sunday afternoon. My parents asked us both to sit down in the living room, and I could tell they'd planned this out ahead of time. Dad started by saying they wanted to apologize formally for the years of unintentional favoritism. He acknowledged specific instances from Ara's documentation, like my expensive birthday party versus her home cake, the gaming setup cost difference, the summer camp versus staying at Grandma's house. Mom talked about how they'd been so focused on managing Ara's difficult behavior that they forgot to make her feel valued and wanted underneath all the discipline. She admitted they'd created a cycle where Ara acted out because she felt less important, then they treated her more harshly because of the acting out. Ara cried through the whole apology, but when they finished, she said she accepted it, and she was glad they were finally admitting what happened. I felt this huge wave of relief wash over me, that we were finally addressing everything openly, instead of pretending it didn't happen. 2 weeks later, the competition results came. Ara got an honorable mention, which meant her painting was recognized as one of the top 15 entries out of over 200 submissions. My parents immediately started planning a celebration dinner and invited extended family. Grandma and Aunt Linda drove over, along with Grandpa and a few cousins. Mom ordered Ara's favorite foods, and Dad bought a cake with congratulations written in frosting. Everyone made a huge fuss over Ara's achievement, asking to see photos of the painting and telling her how talented she was. Grandma hugged Ara for a long time and said she was so proud of her, and Aunt Linda asked if Ara would paint something for her house. Ara glowed with pride the entire evening, soaking up the positive attention and celebration. She kept looking at the honorable mention certificate on the table and smiling, and I realized this was the first time in forever that Ara was celebrated for something positive instead of being the center of attention for causing problems. A few days after the celebration dinner, I noticed Ara buying art supplies at the store, and she didn't pull out her calculator to compare prices with anything I was getting. She just picked what she wanted and put it in the cart without doing any mental math about fairness or equality. When we got home, I mentioned it to her, and she looked surprised, like she hadn't realized the change herself. She told me her therapist helped her understand that keeping score was making her miserable, that constantly calculating who got what was taking up so much mental energy she couldn't enjoy anything. She said she still notices when things feel unfair, but she's learning to speak up calmly instead of exploding, and her therapist gave her scripts for how to express feelings without accusations. The conversation felt weird because Ara was being so reasonable and self-aware, totally different from the girl who threw my phone at the wall 6 months ago. Grandma called my parents a week later, and I heard Mom's side of the conversation from the kitchen. Grandma said she was proud of how they'd handled the situation and apologized for threatening legal action without hearing their full side of the story. She admitted Ara's documentation was alarming when she first saw it. The spreadsheets and receipts made it look really bad, but she was glad they took it seriously and made real changes instead of getting defensive. Mom cried during the call and thanked Grandma for caring enough to intervene, even if the lawyer threat was extreme. Grandma asked to talk to Ara and told her she was proud of her for doing the therapy work and learning better ways to communicate. After the call ended, Mom told Dad that Grandma's apology meant everything because she'd been terrified they'd permanently damaged their relationship with her parents over this whole mess. Ara and I started a tradition of weekly sibling dinners where we order takeout and watch movies together, something we'd never done before in our lives. The first dinner was incredibly awkward because we didn't know how to just hang out without fighting or competing. We ordered pizza and sat on opposite ends of the couch watching some action movie, barely talking except to pass the food. But the next week was easier, and by the fourth dinner, we were actually joking around and arguing about which movie to pick in a normal sibling way instead of a hostile way. Ara told me during one of these dinners that she was glad we were actually becoming friends, that she'd always wanted a real relationship with me, but didn't know how to get past all the resentment and anger. I admitted I'd always seen her as just a problem to avoid, rather than as an actual person with feelings, and she said that hurt to hear, but she understood why I felt that way. Our final scheduled therapy session with Barbara happened 2 months after the art competition celebration. Barbara reviewed our progress systematically, going through her notes from all our previous sessions and highlighting the improvements. She talked about the spending equity my parents had achieved, showing them their own tracking data that proved they'd balanced things out over the past few months. She praised the improved communication between all of us, how we'd learned to express feelings and needs directly instead of through destructive behavior or silent resentment. She specifically mentioned Ara's individual therapy success and how much Ara had grown in managing her emotions and building self-worth that wasn't based on material things or comparisons. She talked about our rebuilt sibling relationship and how rare it was to see siblings actually repair damage this severe. Barbara said we'd done the hard work of acknowledging problems and implementing solutions, the kind of work most families avoid because it's uncomfortable and requires real change. She told us she was confident we could maintain this progress as long as we kept up the monthly check-ins and stayed committed to honest communication. 6 months after the Christmas phone incident, our family took the beach vacation Ara had suggested during one of our therapy sessions. The trip was genuinely fun in a way our family vacations had never been before, because there was no underlying tension about who got what or who was favored. My parents made sure to photograph Ara as much as me, taking turns with each of us for pictures instead of defaulting to photographing me more. We took turns choosing activities, so one day we went to the art museum Ara wanted to see, and the next day we went to the basketball courts I wanted to check out. There was no tension about money or fairness, no calculator math happening in anyone's head. Ara seemed relaxed and happy, actually enjoying herself instead of looking for reasons to feel slighted or left out. On the last night of the trip, we sat on the beach watching the sunset, and Ara told me she finally felt like she belonged in our family, that she didn't feel like the unwanted kid anymore, or like she had to fight for every scrap of attention and validation. Back home, I watched Ara sketching in the living room a few days after we returned from the beach, her art supplies spread across the coffee table while she worked on a new piece for her portfolio. Mom came in and asked about her art class, actually interested and engaged, instead of just going through the motions of parenting, and Ara lit up talking about her current project and the techniques she was learning. Dad walked through and mentioned he was planning to attend her next school art show, already putting the date in his phone calendar so he wouldn't forget or schedule something else. The calculator app sat unused on Ara's phone, and the spreadsheets were long deleted, replaced by actual conversations about feelings and needs without the scorekeeping and resentment. We're not perfect, and probably never will be because families are complicated and messy, but we're so much better than we were when Ara threw my phone at the wall on Christmas morning. Ara caught me watching her sketch and smiled at me. A real, genuine smile without any anger or bitterness behind it, and I smiled back at her. Both of us knew without saying anything that we'd become the family we should have been all along, that we'd done the hard work of fixing something that was broken and actually succeeded. The house felt different now, lighter somehow, like a weight had lifted that I hadn't fully realized we'd been carrying for years.